The warm summer sun shone brightly over Lake Greenwater as Officer Ryan Parker began his regular afternoon patrol. The 34-year-old police officer had been working in the small town of Millfield for nearly 8 years now. He enjoyed the peaceful routine of checking the popular recreation area, especially on beautiful days like today. Ryan drove his police cruiser slowly along the winding road that circled the lake. He rolled down his window to feel the gentle breeze and smell the fresh air. The lake was busy today. Families spread colorful blankets on the grassy areas. Children built sandcastles on the small beach. Teenagers played volleyball, their laughter carrying across the water. Just another perfect summer day, Ryan thought with a smile as he parked his car in the designated area. He stepped out and adjusted his uniform. The blue fabric felt hot under the midday sun, but Ryan didn't mind. He loved his job and took pride in keeping the community safe. He grabbed his water bottle and began walking the familiar path around the lake, nodding and smiling at people who recognized him. Mrs. Wilson, who brought her grandchildren to the lake every Thursday, waved from her regular spot under the big oak tree. "Beautiful day, Officer Parker," she called out. "Sure is, Mrs. Wilson," Ryan replied with a friendly nod. "Keeping cool?" The elderly woman laughed and pointed to her large umbrella. "Doing my best." Ryan continued his walk, stopping occasionally to chat with locals or answer questions from visitors. He checked the public facilities and made sure the lifeguard station was properly staffed. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. Around 2:30 p.m., Ryan reached the far side of the lake. This area was less crowded, with rocky shores instead of sandy beaches. Swimming wasn't allowed here, and signs clearly warned visitors about the dangers. The water was deeper on this side, with unpredictable currents that could surprise even strong swimmers. As Ryan scanned the area, something caught his eye. About 50 yards from shore, something was moving in the water. At first, he thought it might be a large fish or maybe some lake debris being pushed by the wind. But then he saw an arm reach up from the water. His heart jumped. Someone was in trouble. Without hesitation, Ryan grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Parker at Greenwater Lake, North Shore. Possible drowning in progress. Send emergency services immediately." The crackling response came quickly. "Copy that, Officer Parker. Emergency services are on their way, ETA 8 minutes. Ryan knew that might be too late. He scanned the shoreline and spotted a small rowboat tied to a nearby dock. He rushed toward it, his boots pounding against the wooden planks. The boat belonged to old Mr. Henderson, who maintained the lake facilities. "I'm borrowing this emergency," Ryan shouted to a startled couple nearby as he untied the boat and jumped in. He grabbed the oars and began rowing with all his strength toward the struggling figure. His police training kicked in, and he moved with focused determination. Each stroke brought him closer to the person fighting for their life in the deep water. As he approached, Ryan could now see it was a young girl with long dark hair. She couldn't be more than 15 or 16 years old. Her movements were becoming weaker, her head barely staying above water. "Hold on," Ryan shouted. "I'm coming. Just a few more seconds." The girl's terrified eyes locked with his just before she slipped beneath the surface. Ryan's heart pounded as he watched the girl disappear under the water. He quickly positioned the small rowboat and stood up, balancing carefully. Without a second thought, he removed his heavy police belt, kicked off his shoes, and dove into the lake. The water was colder than he expected, sending a shock through his body. The murky green depths made it hard to see clearly. Ryan opened his eyes wide, searching desperately for any sign of the girl. Bubbles rose around him as he swam deeper, his lungs already beginning to burn from holding his breath. Then he saw her. A flash of red fabric about 15 feet below him, the girl's t-shirt. She was sinking slowly, her arms floating limply at her sides, her hair spreading out like dark seaweed around her pale face. Her eyes were closed. Ryan pushed himself downward, powerful kicks propelling him through the water. His ears popped from the pressure as he reached her and wrapped one arm around her waist. With his free arm, he began swimming upward, pulling them both toward the surface. The girl felt heavier than she looked. Ryan's muscles strained with the effort, and his lungs screamed for air. Dark spots appeared at the edges of his vision. For a terrifying moment, he wondered if they would both drown here in the cold depths of Lake Greenwater. Not today, he thought fiercely, kicking harder. After what seemed like forever, they broke through to the surface. Ryan gasped, filling his lungs with precious air. He turned the girl onto her back, keeping her head above water as he towed her toward the rowboat. Getting her into the small boat was another challenge. Ryan pushed her up first, then pulled himself in, water streaming from his soaked uniform. The boat rocked dangerously, nearly tipping over, but he managed to stabilize it. The girl wasn't breathing. Her lips had turned an alarming shade of blue, and her skin was ghostly white. Ryan immediately began CPR, pressing on her chest and breathing into her mouth as he had been trained. "Come on," he muttered between breaths. "Come on, breathe." On the shore, a small crowd had gathered. Someone was waving and pointing, probably telling him that help was on the way, but Ryan knew every second counted now. After what felt like an eternity of chest compressions, the girl suddenly jerked. Water spurted from her mouth as she coughed violently. Ryan quickly turned her onto her side, supporting her as she expelled more water from her lungs. "That's it," he encouraged her, relief washing over him. "You're okay now. Just breathe." The girl's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear evident in her expression. She coughed again, weaker this time, and tried to speak but couldn't find her voice yet. "Don't try to talk," Ryan said gently. "Help is coming. I'm Officer Parker. Can you tell me your name?" He started rowing back to shore with one hand while keeping the other on the girl's shoulder to steady her. She seemed disoriented, her gaze darting around wildly before focusing on him. "Laura," she finally whispered, her voice raspy from the lake water. "Laura Mitchell." "You're going to be okay, Laura," Ryan assured her. "We're almost to shore. The ambulance should be here any minute." As they approached the dock, Ryan could hear the distant wail of sirens. Emergency responders were running down the path toward the lake, carrying medical equipment. Laura suddenly grabbed his wrist, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. Her eyes, now alert and filled with terror, locked onto his. "You tried to kill me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan froze, the oars suspended in midair. "What did you say?" Laura's lips trembled as tears filled her eyes. "My stepfather tried to kill me." The blood in Ryan's veins turned to ice as he processed her words. What had started as a rescue was now something much darker. The paramedics rushed forward as Ryan guided the small boat to the dock. Two men in blue uniforms jumped onto the wooden platform, reaching for Laura. Ryan helped them lift her carefully out of the boat. She was underwater for at least a minute. Ryan explained quickly as they placed Laura on a stretcher. "I performed CPR. She regained consciousness about 3 minutes ago." One paramedic nodded, already checking Laura's vital signs. "Good work, officer. We'll take it from here." But Ryan couldn't simply walk away. Laura's words echoed in his mind. He followed alongside the stretcher, water still dripping from his uniform. "Laura," he said gently, "I need you to tell me more about what happened. You said your stepfather tried to kill you?" Laura's eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd of onlookers. She seemed suddenly afraid to speak. The paramedics continued working, placing an oxygen mask over her face and wrapping her in thermal blankets to prevent shock. "Sir, we need to get her to the hospital," the second paramedic said firmly. Ryan nodded. "I understand, but this is now a potential criminal investigation." He leaned closer to Laura. "I'll be right behind the ambulance. You're safe now." As the paramedics loaded Laura into the ambulance, Ryan hurried to his police cruiser. He grabbed a towel from his trunk and quickly dried off enough to drive safely. His mind raced as he radioed dispatch. "This is Officer Parker. I need information on Laura Mitchell and her family, particularly her stepfather. Also, send another unit to Memorial Hospital. Possible attempted murder case." The dispatcher's surprised voice came back immediately. "Copy that. Detective Wilson is being notified. They'll meet you at the hospital." Ryan followed the ambulance, lights flashing but siren off. He tried to make sense of what had happened. If Laura was telling the truth, her stepfather had somehow tried to drown her in the lake. But how? And why? He needed more details before making any accusations. At the hospital, Ryan paced the waiting room while doctors examined Laura. Detective Wilson arrived 20 minutes later, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes. "Parker," Wilson greeted him. "Dispatch filled me in. You think the girl was pushed into the lake?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't know exactly what happened. She only said her stepfather tried to kill her. We need to hear her full story. Wilson nodded. I ran a quick background check. Laura Mitchell, 15 years old. Mother died 3 years ago. Father remarried last year to a woman named Vanessa. They live in the Oak Ridge neighborhood. A doctor approached them, clipboard in hand. Officers? Laura is stable now. She's asking to speak with you. They followed the doctor to a small room where Laura sat propped up in bed. Her dark hair was still damp, and her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and alert now. Hello, Laura, Ryan said kindly. This is Detective Wilson. Can you tell us what happened today? Laura twisted the edge of her blanket nervously. My stepfather, Mark, took me fishing on the far side of the lake this morning. He said it would be good for us to spend time together. Her voice trembled slightly. We were on the rocks, and he was showing me how to cast the line properly. Then he just pushed me, hard. I fell into the water. Were you a good swimmer? Wilson asked. Laura nodded. That's why he tied my ankles. Both officers stared at her in shock. Ryan hadn't noticed any rope when he pulled her from the water. He used fishing line, Laura continued, tears filling her eyes. He wrapped it around my ankles while pretending to help me with my shoes. When I fell in, I couldn't kick properly. The line cut into my skin when I tried. The doctor stepped forward. We found lacerations on both ankles consistent with her story. Ryan felt a cold rage building inside him. What kind of monster would do this to a child? Where is your stepfather now, Laura? Wilson asked carefully. Laura's fearful eyes met theirs. He thinks I'm dead. He's probably home with my little sister. Detective Wilson immediately stepped outside to make a phone call, his voice low and urgent. Ryan stayed with Laura, pulling a chair beside her hospital bed. Laura, he said gently, we need to know everything. Why would your stepfather want to hurt you? Laura's fingers nervously traced the pattern on her blanket. The hospital lights made her look even paler than before. She took a deep breath before speaking. It started after he married my mom last year. He was nice at first, buying me gifts, taking me places. But after they got married, he changed. Laura's voice grew quieter. He started checking my phone, telling me who I could be friends with. Mom didn't see it. She thought he was just being protective. Ryan nodded encouragingly. What else, Laura? 3 months ago, Mom took out life insurance policies for everyone in the family. Mark insisted on it. Laura's eyes filled with tears. 2 weeks later, Mom died in a car accident. The brakes failed, they said. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Did you tell anyone your concerns? Laura shook her head. Who would believe me? Mark is so normal around other people. He coaches my sister's soccer team. He volunteers at church. Her voice cracked. After Mom died, I found papers in his office. The insurance policy for me was much bigger than everyone else's. The door opened as Detective Wilson returned, accompanied by a woman in a gray suit. This is Ms. Reyes from Child Protective Services, Wilson explained. Laura, she's here to help make sure you and your sister are safe. Ms. Reyes smiled kindly. Hello, Laura. We're going to take good care of you. Detective Wilson turned to Ryan. Officers are at the Mitchell house now. They found Mark Mitchell at home with Laura's 8-year-old sister, Emma. They're bringing him in for questioning and placing Emma in temporary protective custody. Laura's eyes widened with fear. He'll lie. He always lies. Everyone believes him. Not this time, Ryan assured her. The doctor documented your injuries. We have your testimony. And he hesitated, suddenly remembering something important. My body camera. I was wearing it during my patrol. Wilson looked at him sharply. You had it on during the rescue. Ryan nodded. It's waterproof. Standard department issue. It should have recorded everything, including what Laura said right after I pulled her out. For the first time, a hint of hope appeared in Laura's eyes. A nurse entered the room with a small cup of pills and a glass of water. Time for your medication, Laura. This will help with the pain and help you rest. As Laura took the medicine, Ryan stepped outside with Wilson and Ms. Reyes. The body camera footage could be crucial, Wilson said quietly. We need to retrieve it immediately. I'll go get it from my cruiser, Ryan offered. As he walked down the hospital corridor, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about what Laura had told them. If her suspicions about her mother's death were true, Mark Mitchell wasn't just attempting murder, he might already be a murderer. Outside, the summer evening was growing cooler. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Ryan approached his police cruiser. He unlocked the door and reached for the small camera attached to his uniform. The memory card would contain everything: the rescue, Laura's first words about her stepfather, her terrified expression. It was solid evidence that could help put Mark Mitchell away for a long time. As Ryan removed the camera, he noticed a black SUV parked 2 spaces away. Something about it seemed familiar. The window rolled down slightly, revealing a man's face watching him intently. With a jolt of recognition, Ryan realized he was looking at Mark Mitchell, the man whose photo he had just seen on Wilson's phone. But how was that possible? Mitchell was supposed to be in custody. The man's cold eyes met Ryan's, and for one chilling moment, neither moved. Then Ryan's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. The SUV's engine roared to life. The SUV's tires screeched against the pavement as it sped toward the hospital exit. Ryan sprinted to his cruiser, fumbling with his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Parker. Mark Mitchell is at Memorial Hospital parking lot, fleeing in a black SUV, license plate starting with WDK. He's heading east on Marshall Road. Suspect in attempted murder case." Ryan jumped into his car and started the engine, flipping on his lights and siren. The body camera was safely in his pocket. He couldn't lose it, and he couldn't lose Mitchell. "Copy that, Officer Parker," the dispatcher responded. "All units in the area are being alerted. Detective Wilson has been notified." Ryan pulled out of the parking lot, catching sight of the black SUV turning right at the intersection ahead. Mitchell was driving fast but not recklessly, trying not to attract attention. Ryan followed at a distance, knowing backup would arrive soon. His phone rang. Detective Wilson's voice came through the speaker. "Parker, what's happening? How did Mitchell escape custody?" "He was never in custody," Ryan replied, keeping his eyes on the SUV ahead. "The officers must have missed him at the house." There was a pause before Wilson answered. "That's impossible. They reported speaking with him." A terrible thought struck Ryan. Who did they talk to? Did they check his ID? "Hold on," Wilson said. The line went quiet as he made another call. Ryan continued following the SUV, which was now heading toward the highway. Wilson returned to the line. "Parker, the officers spoke to a man who identified himself as Mark Mitchell. They're sending me a photo now." "Damn it. That's not the same man as Laura's stepfather's driver's license photo. They talked to someone else." "Mitchell must have planned this," Ryan said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He knew we'd come for him eventually. 2 police cars appeared ahead, blocking the road. The black SUV suddenly swerved, veering onto a side street. Ryan followed, calling out the new direction to dispatch. "We need to check on Emma, Laura's sister," Ryan said urgently. "If that wasn't Mitchell at the house, where is she?" "CPS is already on it," Wilson replied. "They're going to the address now with additional officers." The SUV made another sharp turn, this time onto a narrow dirt road leading into the dense woods that bordered the eastern edge of town. Ryan slowed down, not wanting to lose control on the uneven surface. "He's heading into Blackwood Forest," Ryan reported. "Request backup at all access points." The forest road grew narrower, branches scraping against Ryan's cruiser. Up ahead, the SUV had stopped. Ryan pulled up 50 yards behind it, drawing his weapon as he exited his vehicle. He took cover behind his car door. "Mark Mitchell," he called out, "this is Officer Parker. Step out of the vehicle with your hands where I can see them." No response. The forest was eerily quiet except for the ticking of cooling engines. Ryan waited, watching for any movement. His radio crackled. "Officer Parker, this is Sergeant Lewis. We're approaching from the north side of the forest. ETA 3 minutes. "Copy that," Ryan responded quietly. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. A text from Wilson. "Urgent. Mitchell's phone GPS shows at the boat rental dock. SUV, registered to Thomas Lane, Mitchell's brother-in-law." Ryan's blood ran cold. If Mitchell wasn't in the SUV, then who was? The driver's door of the SUV slowly opened. A young woman stepped out, hands raised. "Don't shoot," she cried. "Please don't shoot." Ryan maintained his position, Identify yourself. I'm Vanessa Lane, she said, voice trembling. Thomas's wife. Mark told us to help him. He said he'd hurt our children if we didn't. As Sergeant Lewis and his team arrived, surrounding the SUV, Ryan's phone rang again. It was Wilson. Parker. Wilson's voice was tense. CPS found Emma. She's safe. But there's something else. We checked the insurance policies Laura mentioned. There's a $5 million policy on Laura's life. And the beneficiary isn't Mark Mitchell. Then who is it? Ryan asked, already dreading the answer. It's her biological father, Jason Mitchell. Mark is her real father, not her stepfather. The man who married her mother last year is Jason Mitchell, Mark's identical twin brother. Ryan stood frozen, trying to process this shocking revelation. You're saying Laura's stepfather is actually her uncle, the twin brother of her real father? Exactly, Wilson confirmed. Jason Mitchell assumed his brother's identity after Mark disappeared 3 years ago. Laura's mother never knew. According to preliminary DNA tests from their home, the man living as Mark is definitely Jason. Ryan glanced at Vanessa Lane, who was now sitting in the back of a police car. Where would Jason go now? The boat dock? Most likely. Officers are converging there now. But Parker, there's more. Wilson's voice grew even more urgent. Hospital security footage shows someone entering Laura's room 10 minutes ago. A man in scrubs. He disabled the camera, but not before we got a partial image. Ryan's heart hammered against his chest. Jason Mitchell is at the hospital? With Laura? We think so. Hospital security is searching floor by floor. I'm heading back there now. Ryan immediately turned to Sergeant Lewis. I need to get back to the hospital. Now. Take my car, Lewis offered, tossing his keys. It's faster. We'll handle things here. Ryan raced toward the surgeon's vehicle, his mind filled with horrible possibilities. The drive back to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and wailing sirens. He radioed ahead, instructing hospital security to lock down all exits. When he arrived, the emergency entrance was crowded with police officers and hospital staff. Ryan pushed through, spotting Detective Wilson near the elevators. Any sign of them? Ryan asked breathlessly. Wilson shook his head. We've checked security cameras. Jason and Laura are not in the building anymore. They must have left before we locked down. How? Ryan demanded. There are officers everywhere. A young security guard approached them hesitantly. Sir, the maintenance tunnels. They run beneath the hospital to the old building across the street. It's being renovated, mostly empty. Ryan and Wilson exchanged looks. Show us, Wilson commanded. The security guard led them down to the basement, through a maze of corridors to a heavy metal door. This leads to the tunnels. They connect to 5 different buildings in the medical complex. Get back up to cover all exit points. Wilson ordered another officer. Then he turned to Ryan. Let's go. They entered the dimly lit tunnel, weapons drawn. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as they moved forward cautiously. The air was damp and cool, smelling of mildew and dust. He has nowhere to run, Wilson whispered. Every exit will be covered in minutes. Ryan wasn't so sure. Jason Mitchell had planned this carefully, staying one step ahead of them at every turn. He wouldn't trap himself without an escape route. After what seemed like forever, they reached a junction where the tunnel branched in 3 directions. Ryan pointed to fresh water droplets on the floor of the right passage. This way, he whispered. They followed the trail to another door, this one leading into the basement of the old medical building. Ryan pressed his ear against it, hearing nothing. He nodded to Wilson, and they pushed it open slowly. The basement was filled with construction materials and abandoned medical equipment. Plastic sheets hung from the ceiling, creating a maze-like environment. A shuffling sound came from behind a tall stack of drywall. Wilson motioned for Ryan to circle around while he approached from the front. Ryan moved silently through the shadows, his training taking over despite the pounding of his heart. He peeked around a corner and finally saw them. Laura was sitting on the floor, still in her hospital gown. Jason Mitchell stood over her, wearing stolen scrubs, holding something in his hand, a syringe. It will be quick, Jason was saying softly. You won't feel anything. Just like your mother. You killed her, Laura replied, her voice surprisingly steady. You tampered with her car. Jason smiled coldly. She was going to leave me, take you away. I couldn't allow that, not after everything I'd done to take my brother's place. The insurance was just a bonus. Ryan raised his weapon. Police! Drop the sirens, Jason. Jason spun around, pulling Laura up as a shield. The syringe was now pressed against her neck. One step closer, Jason warned. And she dies anyway. Time seemed to freeze in the dim basement. Ryan kept his gun steady, pointed at Jason, but couldn't risk a shot with Laura so close. Detective Wilson appeared on the other side, creating a triangle formation with Jason and Laura in the center. It's over, Jason, Wilson said calmly. The building is surrounded. There's no way out. Jason's eyes darted between the two officers, his grip on Laura tightening. The syringe remained pressed against her neck, a drop of clear liquid glistening at its tip. You don't understand, Jason said, his voice surprisingly steady. I come too far to give up now. 3 years of planning. 3 years of becoming my brother. Ryan took a small step forward. Where is your brother, Jason? What happened to the real Mark Mitchell? A twisted smile formed on Jason's face. Mark was always the successful one. Perfect job, perfect family. I was the failure, the twin nobody remembered. His eyes narrowed. He's feeding the fish at the bottom of Lake Greenwater. Laura gasped, tears streaming down her face. You killed my real father? He didn't deserve you, Jason hissed. I was the better father. I took care of you. By trying to drown me. Laura's voice trembled with anger and fear. Ryan watched Laura carefully. Despite her terrified expression, there was something determined in her eyes. She was buying time, keeping Jason talking. Smart girl. The insurance policy, Wilson said, inching closer from his side. $5 million. That was your plan all along. Jason laughed bitterly. I deserved that money, after living in Mark's shadow my whole life, taking care of his family when he disappeared. His precious daughter was worth more to me dead than alive. While Jason was focused on Wilson, Ryan noticed Laura's hand slowly moving behind her back. She was reaching for something on the construction table behind them, her fingers closed around a small object. Ryan needed to keep Jason distracted. How did you do it? How did you become Mark so completely that not even his wife noticed? It was easy, Jason boasted. Mark and I were identical. I studied him for months. His mannerisms, his voice. After he was gone, I just needed a story about changing my look and attitude after a spiritual awakening. His wife believed everything. As Jason continued talking, Laura caught Ryan's eye. She gave him the smallest nod. In one swift movement, Laura jabbed her elbow hard into Jason's stomach. Simultaneously, she stabbed the object in her hand, a small construction nail, into his arm. Jason howled in pain, the syringe falling from his grasp. Ryan lunged forward, tackling Jason away from Laura. They crashed into the stack of drywall, sending dust and debris flying. Jason fought wildly, his face contorted with rage. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by desperation. You ruined everything. Jason screamed, his hands reaching for Ryan's throat. Wilson pulled Laura to safety while Ryan struggled with Jason on the floor. They rolled across the concrete, knocking over paint cans and tools. Jason grabbed a hammer and swung it wildly, missing Ryan's head by inches. Ryan caught Jason's wrist, twisting until the hammer clattered to the ground. With a practiced move, he flipped Jason onto his stomach, pressing a knee into his back. Jason Mitchell, you're under arrest, Ryan panted, securing handcuffs around Jason's wrists. For attempted murder, identity theft, and I'm betting we'll find evidence of your brother's murder too. As additional officers rushed in to take Jason away, Ryan went to Laura. She was shaking, but standing tall. You were very brave, Ryan told her gently. Laura wiped away her tears. I just kept thinking about what he did to my real dad. And my mom. Her voice broke. They're both gone because of him. Ryan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. But you survived. You fought back. And now he'll pay for everything he's done. As paramedics arrived to take Laura back to the hospital, she looked up at Ryan. Officer Parker? Thank you for saving me. Twice. For the first time since this ordeal began, Ryan smiled. That's what I'm here for. 6 months later, Ryan Parker stood at the edge of Lake Greenwater, watching the morning mist rise from the water. The lake looked peaceful now, hiding its secrets beneath the calm surface. So much had changed since that summer day. The search teams had found Mark Mitchell's remains at the bottom of the lake, exactly where Jason had eventually confessed to dumping his brother's body 3 years earlier. The case had shocked the small town of Millfield, making headlines across the state. Jason Mitchell now sat in a maximum security prison, awaiting trial for 2 counts of murder, his brother's and Laura's mother's, plus attempted murder of Laura. Ryan zipped up his jacket against the autumn chill. He came to the lake often these days, drawn by some invisible connection to the place where everything had started. Officer Parker. Ryan turned to see Laura walking toward him, a warm smile on her face. At 16, she looked healthier now, the color returned to her cheeks. Her grandmother, her real father's mother, stood a short distance away, giving them space to talk. "I thought I might find you here," Laura said, stopping beside him. "Grandmother and I are moving next week. I wanted to say goodbye properly." Ryan nodded, understanding her need for closure. "California, right? You'll like the sunshine there." "That's what grandmother says." Laura looked out at the lake. "Will they ever drain it? To look for others?" The question hung in the air. During his confession, Jason had hinted that Mark might not have been his only victim. "The investigation is ongoing," Ryan answered carefully. "The dive teams will be back in the spring when the water's warmer." Laura wrapped her arms around herself. "I still have nightmares sometimes. About drowning. About him." "That's normal," Ryan assured her. "The therapist says they'll fade with time." After her rescue, Laura had been placed in her grandmother's custody, a kind woman who had been searching for her son Mark for years, never believing he had simply abandoned his family. The truth had been devastating, but now she and Laura were rebuilding their lives together. "The prosecutor says I'll need to testify," Laura said quietly, "at the trial next year." Ryan turned to face her. "Only if you feel ready. Your written statement is very strong evidence, along with the body camera footage and Jason's confession." "I want to do it," Laura said with determination. "I want to look him in the eye when they sentence him." Ryan smiled with pride. Laura had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal. She had even started a support group for teenagers who had survived traumatic experiences. "Oh, I almost forgot." Laura reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you." Ryan opened it to find a photograph. Laura standing with her grandmother and a group of smiling teens, all wearing blue t-shirts with Survivor Strong printed across them. "Our first official meeting," Laura explained. 20 free kids showed up. We talk about everything. Grief, fear, moving forward. It helps, knowing you're not alone. Ryan's throat tightened with emotion. "This is incredible, Laura. You've turned something terrible into something that helps others." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface. "Will you write to me?" Laura asked suddenly. "Just sometimes, to let me know you're okay." "Of course," Ryan promised. "And maybe your group could use a guest speaker sometime. I could fly out for a weekend." Laura's smile brightened. "They'd love that." From the parking lot, her grandmother waved, pointing to her watch. "I should go," Laura said. "We have a lot of packing to do." Before leaving, she surprised Ryan with a quick hug. "Thank you for listening to me that day. Those 3 words, if you hadn't believed me." Ryan nodded, understanding completely. 3 simple words, "He tried to kill me," had changed everything. As Laura walked away, Ryan took one last look at the lake. Sometimes the most important part of his job wasn't the dramatic rescues, but the quiet moments afterward. Truly listening when someone needed to be heard. That made all the difference. He turned and headed back to his patrol car. There were other people who needed his help today.